Unvaccinated people do not support vaccine passports or mandates. This is according to a survey by the University of Johannesburg and the Developmental, Ethical and Capable State Research Division of the Human Sciences Research Council. The survey shows that just over half of all adults support compulsory workplace vaccination and vaccine supports. But support changes significantly by vaccination status. 75% of fully vaccinated South Africans support compulsory workplace vaccination and 78% support vaccine passports. To unpack these findings, we speak to Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller, who is the executive at the Development, Capable and Ethical State Division of the Human Sciences Research Council. Professor, very good morning. Good to speak to you. Now, what stands out for you from this research that you recently conducted?
Well, I think we didn't expect anything. We weren't sure about the vaccine mandate issue because I don't think that any research has been occurring in South Africa around the issue of mandates in the way that we've done it. So when we concluded the fifth round of our survey, which was from October to November of this year, we included the vaccine mandate question, as you've mentioned, compulsory workplace vaccination as well as vaccine passports. And more than 50% of South Africans support these. But there is a difference, as you say, in terms of vaccination status. So people who do not want to be vaccinated do not want to have any of these measures put in place, only 10%. So it kind of makes sense because if you don't want to be vaccinated, you certainly don't want to be subjected to any form of mandate. So there will always be this small core vocal minority, and we've seen this in Europe. You know, there's been a couple of protests around the issue of vaccine mandates in Europe.
Now, some views from what I read in the research were a little bit more divergent, certainly than I would have anticipated. Let's understand the sample size involved in the research and also take a look at some of the demographics, because I do understand from the research that demographics played a significant part in some of the answers that you got from the respondents.
Yes, that's right. So the sample size was 6,700 approximately. And this is weighted by the former Statistician General that we're working with, so it's broadly representative of the population. So one of the things that we did notice, that we have been noticing as a trend in our research, is that Indian South Africans and Black South Africans are far more in support of vaccine mandates than white South Africans, at only about 1/3. So we have a racial difference that we have noticed in the research. We can also see that there's difference in provinces, and perhaps this is also something to take note of. Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, there was the lowest acceptance of the vaccine mandate and vaccine passports in those two provinces. And then there's also a bit of an age difference in that younger people are more willing to have the compulsory vaccine to go to work, but not so supportive of the vaccine passport for going to restaurants, clubs, etc. We did ask specific questions about what kinds of places people felt more comfortable in having to present something like a proof of vaccination. And the highest was for sports stadia at 47% and for churches and places of worship at 40%.
Is lifestyle a factor in the responses that you got, and is it all synonymous with education?
Yes, lifestyle and education, and I suppose they are to some extent related to one another. So we found that respondents with a degree, for example, a university degree, were far less supportive of a vaccine mandate. And this is interesting. One wonders why this is. Perhaps they have more access to information and are sort of more critical of issues. The other is that the respondents living in the suburbs were far less willing to accept the vaccine mandate. So you can see there's a bit of a class element that's creeping in as well.
Do you then maybe suppose that with education comes an understanding of what your entitlements are, and as far as your human rights, the right to choice, and possibly in this instance, the right to say, no, I do not want mandatory vaccines?
I suppose it does reflect a sense of awareness of entitlement, but it also reflects perhaps a less awareness around the importance for social solidarity. And so the whole issue of human rights, as you raised, is a very interesting one, because human rights can be seen as the right to protect the individual, but human rights can also be protected as going hand in hand with responsibilities. So there are a lot of dynamics here that we still have to probe more deeply and try to understand perhaps differences in ideology with regards to race and class and age.
And more specifically, the views on employer vaccine mandates and vaccine passports by vaccination status and obviously vaccine hesitancy.
Yes, absolutely. People who are hesitant and people who definitely do not want to take the vaccine are very much against any form of mandate. So as I mentioned, only 10% of those individuals would be willing to accept either compulsory vaccine status at the workplace or a kind of a vaccine passport. And this is sort of, as I said, relatively obvious because if you haven't been vaccinated, you would have a problem with entering into public places, and perhaps your employer would expect you to be tested. And we know that vaccine tests are quite expensive. And as mentioned, this is happening in Europe as well. So in a sense, the choice is taken away because you are not expected to prove vaccination, but you probably would be expected to take a test. And the reason for this really is to protect employees in the workplace and to protect people in public spaces which are perhaps crowded. Professor,
maybe we could just unpack the racial differences that you picked up, because they are quite glaring. I mean, when you look at Indian adults at 65% and white adults at 32% on their response for compulsory workplace vaccination, what do you read into that? Does it have anything to do with the workspace that these sectors, if you will, find themselves working in?
It's possible that it has to do with that, yes. Although I think that we've established, and we're still working on it, that it has a lot to do with trust. So for the groups who perhaps have more trust in authorities, would be more willing to accept the mandate. And groups that have less trust in authority and governments and political leaders would be less likely to accept any form of mandate. So it does have to do with issues of trust, and I think the white minority in South Africa clearly have a problem with trust in governments.
Okay, obviously interesting numbers that are coming out there. Let's talk about the rural population. I'd imagine that you would have reached out to some members of the rural population. I know that you conducted this via smartphones, but a significant number of individuals in the rural parts of this country may not have access. How did you deal with those members of these survey?
Well, we use a data-free platform called Moya Messenger. And actually, people would be surprised that we reach more rural people and people living in informal settlements than we do members of the white population. So because it's data-free, I think it reaches more people. and the link can be circulated. So there hasn't really been an issue with representativity in this instance. But of course, you have to correct for gaps if there are any. And ironically, the gap here is all the white South Africans. And that's why we do the scientific weighting, so that we look at Stats SA and we weight the sample according to the age and education status. And we find that this then brings us to a sample that is broadly representative of the South African public, including rural South Africans. And we find that rural South Africans are far more willing to be vaccinated, and they're far more willing to accept the vaccine mandate.
Professor, final question. Government's intention was to achieve herd immunity by December 31st. Well, clearly not happening. What is your advice to government on upping the numbers of those who get vaccinated?
You know, South Africans do want to get vaccinated. I mean, our research shows that more than 65% of South Africans are willing to be vaccinated. But we find that access is a problem. So I think what needs to be focused on is to make sure that you get vaccines to the people. There seems to be a problem perhaps with the location of the vaccine sites. And of course, for some people, there are costs involved, such as traveling to a vaccine site, taking a day off work in order to do so. So those kinds of things need special attention, and messages to the youth need to be specially tailored as well, to make it more attractive for the youth to be vaccinated, to make the youth realize that they're not immune to this particular virus.
Professor, I certainly appreciate your time. We were speaking to Divisional Executive at the Development, Capable and Ethical State for the Human Sciences Research Council, Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller, and summing that up there, saying that South Africans are keen to get vaccinated, but it's the issues around accessibility and cost.